"If you don't like staying with us, you can leave," my sister snapped, "in my own house, where she and her family lived for free. Stay with me as I walk you through what happened. And if my story connects with you in any way, I'd really appreciate it if you supported by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others who might need to hear this." My name is Amara Johnson. I'm in my late 20s, and I've been a registered nurse for almost 7 years. I worked endless night shifts, picked up every bit of overtime I could, and saved penny by penny until I finally bought my first home. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, a small, cozy 3-bedroom house that I was proud of. For the first time, I felt like I had built a safe space for myself, a reward for all the sacrifices I made. Not long after I moved in, my older sister Danielle called me. She and her husband, Marcus, were going through financial struggles. He had lost his job, and with 2 kids to take care of, they were drowning. Danielle begged me to let them stay, just for a few months, until they got back on their feet. She promised she'd help with groceries, cleaning, and bills. I hesitated, but she's my sister, and I couldn't bear the thought of my nieces struggling. I told her they could move in. At first, it felt like the right thing to do. I rearranged things in the house to make them comfortable. I even gave them the bigger bedroom since Danielle said it would be better for the kids. I told myself it was temporary, just a sacrifice I could make for family. But within weeks, it became clear Danielle had no intention of keeping her promises. The dishes piled up, the grocery bags I brought home would be emptied by the next morning, and the bills stayed on my shoulders. When I came home from 12-hour shifts, I found the living room scattered with toys, food wrappers on the floor, and Danielle lounging on the couch like she owned the place. I told myself not to overreact. Family helps family, right? I bit my tongue, thinking maybe things would balance out. But what hurt me most wasn't the mess or the bills. It was how quickly the respect disappeared. My home, the place I worked so hard for, no longer felt like mine. Danielle criticized how I decorated the house, told me I worked too much, and even rolled her eyes whenever I tried to remind her of her promise to help. I kept quiet, swallowing the frustration. Deep down, though, I knew I was slowly becoming a stranger in my own house. And this was only the beginning of how bad things would get. It didn't take long before Danielle and Marcus started acting like the house belonged to them. What shocked me most was how quickly they slipped into that role, as if they had been waiting for the chance. At first, they asked if they could use the master bedroom since it was bigger and better for the kids. I hesitated, because that room was the one place in the house I had decorated carefully to feel like my own. But Danielle kept saying things like, "You're single, Amara, you don't really need the extra space," until I gave in. So, in my own home, I packed up my things and moved into the smaller guest room. I told myself it was only for a little while, and that it was worth it if it meant my nieces would be comfortable. But as I settled into that cramped room, a small knot started forming in my stomach. I brushed it off, reminding myself that family came first, but the unease stayed. Once they settled into the master bedroom, Danielle started making little comments that grew more cutting each day. She would glance at my work uniform and say, "All those hours and you're still living like this?" Or she'd look around my living room and complain that my style was too plain, suggesting I should let her touch things up. Sometimes she even said my schedule was ridiculous, that I worked too much and didn't know how to live a proper life. Her words stung because I had worked so hard for everything I had. Every picture frame, every piece of furniture, even the walls painted with my favorite colors. All of it came from my sweat and sacrifice. But now, sitting in my own living room, I felt like an outsider listening to her critique it all. Marcus wasn't any better. He strutted around like he was the man of the house. He made decisions about what food to buy, where furniture should go, even what shows we watched on TV, all without asking me. If I tried to speak up, Danielle would cut me off with, "Relax, Amara, we're just trying to make this place feel like home." I started to feel invisible in the very space I had built for myself. I'd come home from long shifts, exhausted, only to hear Danielle questioning my choices as if I needed her approval. Every time I wanted to argue back, I stopped myself. I told myself this was temporary, that eventually they would get back on their feet and move out. But the truth was something was shifting. The house didn't feel like my home anymore. The balance of respect and space was gone, and Danielle and Marcus were settling in as though they had no intention of leaving. And I was left in the shadows of my own life, convincing myself to endure it just a little longer. The first month passed, and Danielle never once offered to help with the bills. I tried to be patient, thinking maybe she just needed more time to sort herself out, but every time I brought it up, she had a ready excuse. Money's tight right now, Amara. You know we'll pay you back when things get better. Her words were always smooth, always dismissive, and each time I swallowed my frustration. Even though I knew the electricity, the water, the gas, all of it was on my shoulders alone. Marcus was worse. Every time I went grocery shopping, I spent carefully, stretching my paycheck so that the house would be stocked with enough food for everyone. But it was like feeding a bottomless pit. Within days, the fridge would be empty. Marcus ate like he hadn't seen food in years, and when I'd ask if he could at least replace the basics, like milk or bread, he'd laugh and say, "We'll get it next time." But there was never a next time. Even the kids, who I used to adore, began picking up on Danielle's tone. Where once they'd greet me with hugs and smiles, now they rolled their eyes when I spoke. If I asked them to pick up their toys or clean their mess from the kitchen, they would smirk and mutter under their breath. One day, I heard the oldest say, "Why should we listen to her? Mom said this is our house too." Those words cut deep because I knew exactly where they had learned them. The tension grew thicker every day. I came home exhausted after long shifts, hoping to rest, but instead I was met with chaos. Dishes piled high in the sink, food stains on the counter, laundry tossed carelessly in the hall. Finally, one evening, I asked them all to pitch in just a little. "Danielle, could you please help me keep the house clean? It's too much for me alone." She didn't even look up from her phone. Instead, she gave me a smirk and snapped, "You act like we're your tenants. We're family. Chill." That one sentence silenced me. Family. She used the word as if it gave her permission to take everything and give nothing back. My chest tightened with anger, but I forced myself not to explode. I knew if I lashed out, they would twist the story against me. That night, I lay awake in the cramped guest room, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I admitted to myself that this wasn't going to end soon. Danielle wasn't planning to leave, and Marcus had made himself comfortable. Even the children no longer respected me. Quietly, I began documenting everything. The unpaid bills, the grocery receipts, the endless messes, even some of the words they threw at me. I knew one thing for sure. If I wanted to take my home back, I would need proof. And deep down, I understood this situation was only going to get worse before it got better. One evening, as I came in from work, I heard Danielle's voice drifting from the master bedroom. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her tone was loud and sharp. Curious, I paused near the door, and what I heard froze me. "She thinks she's better than us just because she has a house," Danielle said into the phone, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Please, we're basically running this place now." I stood there in silence, my stomach twisting. My own sister, the one I had opened my doors to, was mocking me in my own home. The words hit harder than I expected. I had sacrificed so much to help her, and instead of gratitude, all I got was ridicule. I wanted to walk in and confront her right then, but I stopped myself. What would be the point? She didn't respect me enough to hide how she truly felt. After that night, things only went downhill. Danielle started inviting her friends over, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. They filled my living room with loud laughter, blasting music, and empty bottles left scattered across the coffee table. I'd come home exhausted after double shifts, craving nothing but silence, only to walk into a full-blown party in what was supposed to be my safe space. One night, after a grueling 14-hour shift at the hospital, I dragged myself home, barely keeping my eyes open. All I wanted was a shower and a few hours of peace. When I walked into the laundry room, I stopped dead. My clothes, neatly folded earlier, had been shoved carelessly into a corner. In their place, Danielle's piles of laundry sat waiting to be washed. My chest burned with anger. That was the one space I still considered mine, the one routine that kept me sane, and she had thrown it aside as if it meant nothing. I stormed to the living room where Danielle sat scrolling through her phone. "Why did you touch my things?" I demanded. She looked up, completely unfazed. "Relax, Amara. I needed space for my laundry. It's not that serious." "Not that serious?" My voice cracked. "This is my house, Danielle. You don't get to just throw my stuff around like trash." She rolled her eyes, her tone sharp and cruel. "You're always so dramatic. You act like you're the only one who matters here." The argument escalated quickly, voices rising, years of frustration spilling out. I reminded her of all the promises she made, the bills she never paid, the disrespect that had become normal. Danielle smirked, and then she spat out the words that would burn into my memory forever. If you don't like staying with us, you can leave." For a moment, the room went quiet. I stared at her, my heart pounding, realizing that my sister had finally said out loud what she had been showing me all along. She truly believed my home belonged to her. And that was the moment something inside me broke. After Danielle's words, something inside me shut down. I didn't yell back. I didn't scream the way I wanted to. Instead, I went silent. It wasn't the silence of defeat, but the silence of someone who had finally made up her mind. For weeks, I had been living in chaos, treated like a guest in my own house, but that moment was the breaking point. I realized arguing with Danielle was useless. She had no respect for me, and she never would. So instead of fighting, I began planning. Quietly, carefully. The next day, while Danielle was out with her kids and Marcus was lounging in front of the TV, I sat in my small guest room with my laptop. I typed into the search bar, "Eviction laws in my state and tenant rights." My hands shook as I scrolled through page after page of legal information. At first, it was overwhelming, but the more I read, the more relief I felt. Because Danielle and Marcus had never signed a rental agreement and had never paid me a single cent, they weren't considered legal tenants. They were simply occupants. And that meant I had the right to have them removed, lawfully. I leaned back in my chair, letting that fact sink in. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control again. I didn't have to keep enduring this nightmare. There was a way out, and it was right in front of me. But I knew I couldn't be reckless. Danielle was unpredictable, and Marcus had a temper. If they suspected what I was planning, things could turn ugly fast. So I stayed quiet. I smiled when Danielle mocked me. I nodded when Marcus barked orders about groceries. I acted as if nothing had changed, but inside, I was counting down the days. Every shift I worked, I came home, greeted them politely, and then disappeared into my room where I researched more, step by step. At the same time, I started protecting myself. I gathered my important documents, birth certificate, passport, bank papers, and slipped them into a folder. I began moving my valuables, little by little, to my friend Tasha's apartment across town. Jewelry, family photos, anything I couldn't risk being damaged or stolen. Each time I carried a bag out of the house, I felt a little lighter, like I was peeling back the grip they had on me. They didn't notice, too wrapped up in their own world. Danielle still held parties, Marcus still ate through everything in the fridge, and the kids still left messes behind. But none of it hit me the same anymore. Because I knew something they didn't. Their time in my house was coming to an end. In the quiet of my room, I whispered to myself, "This is my home. And I'm taking it back." Once I knew the law was on my side, everything shifted. I stopped feeling like a victim in my own house and started moving like someone with a plan. I rearranged my work schedule, swapping shifts with coworkers whenever I could so I wouldn't be home during the day when Danielle and Marcus were most active. It gave me the space I needed to set things in motion without constant confrontation. At night, I returned quietly, went straight to my room, and avoided unnecessary arguments. From the outside, it probably looked like I had given up. But in reality, I was just preparing for the storm. After weeks of careful preparation, I finally filed the official eviction papers. My heart pounded when I handed them over to the clerk at the courthouse, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of peace. This was no longer just an idea. It was happening. Within a few days, the sheriff came by to serve Danielle and Marcus with the notice. The moment Danielle read the papers, her face twisted in rage. "Are you serious right now?" she screamed, waving the notice in my face. "You can't kick family out. We don't have anywhere to go." Marcus jumped in, his voice louder than hers. "You're heartless, Amara. After everything we've been through, this is how you treat us." I stood my ground, my voice calm though my chest was tight. "This is my house. You told me I could leave if I didn't like staying here. I'm just making sure I don't have to leave my own home." The room went silent for a moment. Danielle's eyes widened, realizing I had thrown her own words back at her. For once, she didn't have a clever comeback. But her silence didn't last long. She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. Within hours, my phone started buzzing. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly calling, all carrying the same message. "How could you do this to your sister? She has kids. You're being selfish." I listened to them one by one, biting my tongue as they repeated Danielle's version of the story. She had told them I was throwing her family onto the streets for no reason, painting herself as the victim and me as the cruel sister who valued her house more than her blood. But when it was my turn to speak, I told the truth. They haven't paid a single bill. They eat my food, they disrespect me in my own home, and they treat me like I don't matter. I didn't work myself to the bone to be treated like this. I'm not selfish, I'm protecting my peace. Some relatives hung up cold. Others stayed quiet, maybe realizing Danielle wasn't telling the full story. But I didn't care anymore about who believed me. For the first time in a long time, I felt firm in my decision. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And I wasn't backing down. The days after the eviction notice were the hardest. My phone never seemed to stop ringing. Aunties, cousins, even people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt the need to call and lecture me. Every conversation started the same. Amara, she's your sister. How can you do this to her? She has children. Some even went as far as saying I would regret this decision for the rest of my life. At first, I tried to stay polite. I explained over and over again that Danielle and Marcus hadn't paid a single bill since they moved in. I told them how I had been shoved into my guest room, how my food disappeared from the fridge within hours, and how they treated me like an outsider in the house I worked so hard for. I'm not kicking her out for no reason, I said firmly. I'm taking back my home. Most didn't want to hear it. They only wanted to guilt-trip me into backing down. But a few relatives listened quietly and then lowered their voices, saying, Amara, you're right. I don't blame you. She's been taking advantage of you. Those words, though few and far between, gave me enough strength to keep going. Marcus, on the other hand, wasn't subtle. One night he cornered me in the kitchen, towering over me with his arms crossed. His voice dropped low, almost a growl. You think you can just throw us out? You better think again, Amara. You don't know what I'm capable of. My heart raced, but I didn't flinch. What Marcus didn't know was that I had already changed the locks on the side doors and installed security cameras around the house. If he tried anything, I would have proof. I looked him straight in the eye and said, This is my house. You don't scare me. Then I walked away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Danielle's hostility grew worse as the eviction date approached. She slammed doors, left messes on purpose, and muttered insults loud enough for me to hear. Sometimes I caught her whispering to the kids, twisting the story so they would see me as the bad guy. The once warm atmosphere in my home had turned into a battlefield, but I refused to let her win. Each night, I lay in my small room, staring at the ceiling, reminding myself why I started this. I thought of every shift I worked, every dollar I saved, every ounce of pride I felt the day I got the keys to my house. And then I remembered Danielle's mocking words. If you don't like staying with us, you can leave. No, I told myself. I'm not leaving. She is. The tension in the house was unbearable, but beneath it all, I felt a quiet strength building inside me. Danielle could scream, Marcus could threaten, the relatives could gossip. None of it mattered. The countdown had already begun, and soon, the house would finally be mine again. The morning air was heavy with tension. Amara had barely slept, her mind replaying every cruel word Danielle had thrown at her. Today wasn't just about evicting freeloaders. It was about reclaiming her life, her peace, her dignity. She stood by the front window, clutching a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, watching for the arrival of the sheriff's car. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black and white pulled up to the curb. 2 deputies stepped out, one holding a clipboard. Amara's heart pounded, but she straightened her back. This was the day she stopped being the victim in her own home. Inside, Danielle and Marcus were sprawled on the couch, watching TV like it was any other day. When the knock came, Danielle smirked, assuming it was a delivery. But when she opened the door and saw the uniformed officers, her face drained of color, then immediately flushed red with rage. What is this? She barked, waving her arms. You can't just come here and harass us. This is my sister's house. We're family. The deputy's voice was firm but calm. Ma'am, this is an official eviction. You've been served proper notice. Today is the deadline. You need to gather your belongings and leave. Danielle's voice rose into a shrill scream. Are you serious? Amara, you're doing this to us? To your own blood? After everything we've been through. She turned dramatically to the kids, who were now crying, frightened by the uniforms and shouting. Look at your aunt. She's throwing us into the streets like garbage. Marcus tried to puff up his chest, stepping toward Amara. This isn't right. We don't have anywhere to go. You'll regret this. Amara met his glare, steady and unflinching. I warned you. I asked for respect, for contribution, for the bare minimum of decency. You gave me none of that. This is my house. I'm not your doormat. And I'm not backing down. The deputies moved closer, making sure Marcus didn't cross the line. Danielle continued her performance, sobbing 1 second and raging the next. Blood is supposed to be thicker than water. You'll regret this, Amara. You'll regret betraying your own family. Outside, curious neighbors had gathered. Some peeked from behind curtains. Others stood on porches. A few even clapped softly when Danielle's shrieking echoed down the block. Everyone had witnessed the chaos these guests had brought to the quiet street. Cars parked carelessly, late-night arguments spilling into the yard, kids left unsupervised. Finally, with the deputies' watchful eyes on them, Danielle and Marcus gathered their bags in a flurry of curses and accusations. The children shuffled behind them, wiping tears, while Danielle shot one last venomous look over her shoulder. Amara stood at the doorway, unshaken. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply breathed deeply and freely as the house emptied of poison. For the first time in months, her home was hers again. And she promised herself she would never let anyone take that from her again. Amara closed the door behind the sheriff and leaned against it, her hands trembling. The house was silent for the first time in months. No Danielle's shrill laughter echoing through the hallways, no Marcus stomping around, no children tossing toys across the living room she had once kept neat. Just silence. For a moment, it was almost unsettling, like she had stepped into someone else's life. She wandered slowly through each room, her eyes catching on the dents in the walls where the kids had slammed doors, the stains on the carpet Danielle never bothered to clean, the empty pantry shelves stripped bare week after week. A flicker of guilt crossed her heart. They were family, after all. She had just sent them into the world with no real plan. But then, as quickly as the guilt arrived, it was chased away by memory. Danielle's mocking words, Marcus's arrogance, the way they had treated her like a stranger in her own house. Amara walked into the kitchen and ran her hand along the counter, remembering nights she had come home from a 12-hour shift to find dishes piled high and Danielle sprawled on the couch. She remembered standing at this very sink, holding back tears while her so-called sister barked. "If you don't like it, you can leave." "No," Amara whispered to herself now, her voice firm. "I wasn't the one who needed to leave." Over the next few days, Amara began reclaiming her space piece by piece. She scrubbed the floors until they shined again. She threw out the broken furniture Marcus had dragged in and replaced it with things she loved, bright cushions, fresh flowers, little touches of warmth. Every act of cleaning, every rearranged piece of furniture felt like shedding layers of bitterness. She was not just restoring her home, she was restoring herself. Word spread quickly among the family. Some relatives refused to speak to her, muttering about how heartless she was. Danielle's version of the story painted Amara as selfish and cruel, and those who always leaned toward drama chose to believe it. But others, quietly in late-night calls or brief visits, told Amara she did the right thing. They had seen Danielle's true colors before. They just hadn't had the courage to call her out. Amara didn't beg anyone to take her side. For once, she felt no need to explain or defend herself. Her home was her sanctuary again, and the peace that filled it was louder than any gossip. Sitting on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Amara realized she was both freer and stronger than before. The experience had hardened her in some ways, made her wary of blind generosity, but it had also taught her the power of boundaries. Her house was quiet now, yes, but in that quiet, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: peace. And she vowed never to let anyone steal it again. Months had passed since the eviction, and Amara's life had finally settled into a calm rhythm. Her house was hers again, filled with quiet evenings, soft music, and the small joys she had almost forgotten. Cooking a meal without someone criticizing her, reading on the couch without children yelling over cartoons, sleeping in her own master bedroom without feeling like an intruder. The scars of what happened were still there, but she was healing piece by piece. One rainy evening, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. Danielle. For a moment, Amara considered ignoring the call. But something inside told her to pick it up. "Amara." Danielle's voice was shaky, nothing like the arrogant tone she had used before. I don't know who else to call. Things with Marcus didn't work out. He left, and I don't have anywhere to go with the kids. Please, we just need a place for a little while. Can we come back?" Amara sat in silence, the memories flooding her. Danielle taking her room, Marcus devouring her groceries, the children mocking her, the endless disrespect. Then the sharpest memory of all, Danielle's voice spitting. "If you don't like staying with us, you can leave." Her heart tightened, but she didn't waver. Calmly, she replied, "If you don't like staying where you are, you can leave. But you're not coming here." There was a long pause on the other end. Danielle gasped softly, as if the weight of her own words had finally come back to crush her. She started to beg, but Amara didn't let her finish. She ended the call, placed her phone face down on the table, and exhaled. The irony wasn't lost on her. Danielle had once strutted around her house as though it were her own, mocking her, belittling her, acting as if Amara had no place there. Now the tables had turned. Danielle was the one without a home, and Amara was the one holding the power to say yes or no. And she chose no. That night, Amara sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. She thought about how much she had sacrificed over the years for family, believing that love meant tolerating anything. But this experience had taught her something different. Sometimes the people closest to you could wound you the deepest. Sometimes family could be the very ones who tried to break you. Protecting her peace, her sanity, her dignity, those things were worth more than keeping toxic people around. And though it hurt to draw that line, she knew it was the only way forward. Amara closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I finally chose me." For the first time in a long time, she felt no guilt. Only freedom. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. Do you think Amara made the right choice by standing up to her sister and reclaiming her home? Or should she have tried to work things out with them? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear what you think. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story.